Now, the Hold'em bot API is very straightforward. We're going to use the C# language here, but the concepts really do apply to any programming language you're going to work with. First, you'll want to reference that finalbot.hold'em.com in assembly. And then once you do that, you just need to derive a class from botBase. BotBase has in it one abstract method, which is called getBet. GetBet returns a number, and it takes a table. The table provides all the information about the current state of the table in the hand you're in. And I will go into some detail on that in one slide. But I also want to note that on your bot class itself, there will be a list of table final objects, which represent the end result of all the hands that have been played so far in your tournament, or rather in your matchup. So you'll be able to use that to go back and look at, I guess, really betting history is the most interesting thing from that. So if you wanted to write a bot that was sophisticated enough to be able to analyze bets that were made by your competitors throughout the course of the matchup, and then be able to predictively optimize your bet based on that, you would get it from your history member. In this case, we're returning 0, which really means that in the event that we're required to bet something in order to stay in the match, we'll fold, or if there is no running bet at the time, 0 would be an indication of check. It's also important to know that there really is no illegal number to bet when you return a number from your getBet method. The system itself will be kind of smart and figure out if you bet 0 or below that it'll just round it up to 0. If you bet more chips than you have, it'll round it down to the chips you have. And if you bet, for example, more than 0 but less than the call amount, it'll round that down to 0. So the system tries to be very forgiving to make it easier to develop against and really focus on your core bot logic. Now, the table class itself is in that shared assembly, and it has some very interesting properties on it that are useful to use. So in the case of the players list, that just tells you which players are available, and the player object itself gives you a GUID, which is an ID that you will know universally for that player in this matchup. Throughout the tournaments and all the different matchups you work in, you only get a GUID to associate with any given bot competitor in the game. And that GUID is for the matchup specifically. So you can't really hard code for a specific opponent because you'll never know who you're actually up against unless you write something that really, really analyzes their betting patterns and understands who they are. But there's really no other way for you to hard code your strategy for a specific opponent because all you get is a GUID that only lives for that matchup. Second is a list of the cards that you have. This will always be 2. You'll always have 2 cards in your hand, which are your private cards. And in and of themselves, they're not particularly useful. You usually want to combine them with the community cards that are available to determine what your hand is. Of course, the community cards don't come into play until after the opening. So really, in the flop, you'll get 3 community cards to work with, and then, of course, at the turn in the river to fill out your best 5-card hand. But at any given time, you'll also have something called My Hand that lives on that table class, which is the best hand that can be made from the cards that you have. So it takes your community cards and it takes your private cards, and it actually combines those together and tells you what the best hand is. And the comment there is wrong, but we also have a list of lists of bets. And this is a little complicated to work with, but the point is that in any given tournament, or rather in any given matchup for a hand of Hold'em, you're going to have 4 rounds of betting, assuming that at least 2 players stay in. And so this list of lists can be a list of up to 4 lists, and the first list will be the bet history for the opening, and then you'll have the bet history for the flop, and so on. And so you'll be able to look through those for the current hand to determine, if you desire, how people have bet so far to get to where you are. Another useful thing is the list of pots. The first pot is clearly the first pot that everyone was in on, and then as players go all in, there can be side pots that start to form, and so those will be added at the end of that list. So at any given time, you'll always have at least 1 pot, but you may have 3 pots, or up to I guess 8 pots, depending on how many people stay in the games, or rather, if it's up to 10 players. In our case, we generally have up to 8 players in a tournament, so you would have fewer. There's also a pointer to your player, which just gives you the information about what your GUID is, as well as the number of chips that you have left in the game. and this is the chips that you have that are not committed to the current pot. And we also provide your GUID just for the sake of you being able to know what that is. It makes the reference a little easier if you want to make queries against the rounds, or well, really against the rounds to determine or at least call out what your bets are. Another important thing is the call amount, and this is the minimum number of chips that you would need to return in order to call the current hand. So this will potentially be 0, and if you return 0 when the call amount is 0, it means that you're checking. And if you return 0 when the call amount is greater than 0, that means you want to fold. And finally, there is a minimum to raise amount. This is important just because there is a minimum raise requirement for anytime you want to raise from the current bet, and that could be twice. It could be the big blind if you are in the opening or flop, or it could be double the big blind if you are at the river or the the turn of the river. In the case that you decide to raise, you have to have at least this much in a return, or else it will reduce you to a call. If you do raise, you're not limited to this raise amount, but it just means the smallest amount that you could return to raise.